Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, and peace and blessings be upon all of you. My name is Sharik Abdul Ghani, and I am the director of Minaret Foundation, where our focus is to lift American Muslim voices for sustainable change through multi-faith and civic engagement. Today, we have with us our esteemed guest, Constable Trever Nehls, who is running for Fort Bend County Sheriff here in the county that I reside in. I have a big vested interest in this race, as well as the other races that are running in Fort Bend County as well. So Trevor's here with us because he's running for Fort Bend County Sheriff. He's been in law enforcement for a considerable amount of time, and he's with us because of our candidate Q&A session. And this is another installment of our candidate Q&A session for the Muslim community and the wider multi-faith community to really get to know our candidates at almost every level. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you for joining us today.
Assalamu alaikum to all my friends. And Sharik, I thank you and the Minaret Foundation for giving me the opportunity this next 30, 45 minutes, whatever time allows, to get to know each other a little better. So I'm appreciative of that opportunity. So welcome all the viewers, listeners to this broadcast. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being so generous, especially as we know you have your duties in law enforcement, but you're also running a campaign at the same time. So I think two full-time jobs, you'll get sleep after elections, I imagine.
Well, you probably know just as well as many of your listeners, just being a father, a husband, a full-time job in law enforcement and running a campaign can be very exhausting and time extensive. But you know something, when you're in a campaign, the whole family's involved.
Oh,
Really a family adventure, because you have to have the support of your family
absolutely.
in order to be successful. So my wife and my three children, Madison, Wyatt, and Parker, they understand what Dad's trying to do, what we're trying to do together. And it's very much a collaborative effort because we all need to give a little more. Each of my children and my wife, because they understand the time constraints when you're on a campaign.
Well, Trevor, you mentioned family, and that's a perfect segue into your platform. Yes. Could you tell us a little bit more about what issues are important to you as you run for Fort Bend County Sheriff?
Well, yes, I am married. My wife's name is Carrie. We've been married for 20 years, and we have three children. Madison, who just turned 16 back in May, so she is driving. So be careful out there, folks. And I have a son, Wyatt, who's 14, and my youngest son will turn 13 this Friday. So we're excited about spending some time together Friday evening to celebrate his 13th birthday, and his name is Parker. But
happy birthday, Parker, and an early congrats to you as well, Trevor.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So I moved to Texas in 1992. I grew up in the state of Wisconsin, one of 7 children. And if your viewers are not aware, I'm an identical twin. And my twin brother's name is Troy. Now, he's my younger brother by 7 minutes.
7 minutes?
7 minutes.
Usually we hear 7 seconds, 12 seconds, 15 seconds. He took his time.
He's the youngest of the 7 children. And of those 7, it's 6 boys and 1 girl. And our sister Tammy is 13 months older than Troy and I.
Wow.
So we grew up in the state of Wisconsin. Our father, Edwin Nehls, is a Korean War veteran, a war hero. He received the Distinguished Service Cross for his valor, which is our nation's second highest award for valor in combat, right below the Medal of Honor. So he instilled service to our country at an early age at 17. And then upon his return home from the Korean War, he began a law enforcement career, and he did close to 30 years. And of those 30 years, he was the elected sheriff for 14 in Dodge County, Wisconsin, which is where we grew up. And then we have another brother, Todd, who's an older brother, and he also joined the military at an early age. And he retired after 35 years with the Wisconsin Army National Guard, and he retired at the rank of colonel. And he was also an elected sheriff in Dodge County, Wisconsin. So father elected sheriff, older brother elected sheriff of the same county. Well, back in 1992, I moved to Houston as a result of an older brother, Terry, living outside of Richmond, Texas. And I came down on vacation, and we went to Galveston. And for a guy growing up like sort of on a farm and farmland, when you go to Galveston for the first time and you see the beach, you're somewhat struck by, wow, this is beautiful, beautiful waves. Uh, I was single. I really didn't have anything holding me back in Wisconsin. I already received a bachelor's degree. So I packed up, moved to Houston, went through the police academy, and started a career with Sugarland Police Department in 1993. And I left Sugarland after close to 20 years as a result of being elected as the Precinct 4 Constable in 2011. And I took office as the constable January 1st of 2012. And it's the office I hold today.
Wow. Wow. So tell us more about these issues. So this is almost as if law enforcement, military service to our country is in your blood.
Well, I think it's sort of in the DNA of a person when it comes to service. Serving your country, your county, your state, your community. And, we grew up with it, with our father and an older brother. And as I'm sure you already know, Sharik, Troy's our current elected sheriff,
Right.
and he's running for the congressional seat. Well, that's 3 Nehlses in the same family that have been elected sheriffs somewhere in our great country. And hopefully January 4th, we'll be able to say there's a 4th Nehls that has been elected sheriff somewhere across our great country, either Wisconsin or Texas. And I think that is probably a story that is unheard of or not very common across our country, to have that many within one family serve in a capacity to where they're elected to lead a sheriff's office. But the same applies with the military. I've been in the Army Reserve for over 32 years. And I announced a couple weeks ago my planned retirement, because 32 years of military service and multiple combat deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Arabian Peninsula, it can become trying. And that's a lot of time away from home, a time away from family. But after September 11th, our world really changed. And that's when all the deployments began to happen within, the Army Reserve or the National Guard, so on and so forth. So I've always been about service. And I believe service needs to be selfless and not selfish. It would be easy to grumble a lot when it comes to being deployed overseas for a year, taking time away from family, your work, everything, just leaving everything behind. But the fact is, you do it because you love your country, you love other people, and you want to contribute to society. And that's why I've been a faithful servant of the military for 32 years. But I'm glad that it's almost at a closure, and then I can leave it to some of the younger folks to carry the baton.
So in terms of carrying the baton, tell us, what would you like to accomplish as Fort Bend County Sheriff?
Well, I believe that the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office is under very good leadership under my twin brother, Troy. And he's got a great staff. And there's 826 employees at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. Great men and women that do an admirable job each and every day under stressful, turbulent conditions at times, considering the state of law enforcement that exists right now in our country, with some of the, protesting civil unrest that exists in a lot of our large metropolitan areas across the country. That can bring added stress upon a police officer, no matter where they're working. Fortunately, we haven't seen that type of activity in Fort Bend County. And I attribute that to the deep relationship that's been built between the different ethnic groups and cultures that call Fort Bend County home, and the leadership of our law enforcement agencies in Fort Bend County, whether it's Sugar Land, Katy, Missouri City, Stafford, Needville, does not matter. I think the relationships that have been forged and further developed over the last 30 years has paid dividends, because you don't see the type of unrest in Fort Bend County because there's a mutual admiration and respect, from my perspective, between the people that we serve.
Right.
I think there's a very favorable rating and perception that exists if you asked anybody in Fort Bend County how they feel about the law enforcement officers that protect and serve them on a daily basis. And I think the numbers would be a very high majority of them would say, you know, our police departments, they do a great job across Fort Bend County. We feel very comfortable while we lay our head on our pillows each and every night. And we have not experienced what other large areas have experienced in the past several months with some of the unrest that has plagued some of our large metropolitan cities. So I not only credit the leadership of Fort Bend County, but I also credit the 820 or 30,000 that call Fort Bend County home, because law enforcement is a two-way street. You sort of have to come halfway. I think it's important that the citizens work in a collaborative manner with the police agencies and vice versa. And fortunately, that's what we have. We have that mutual admiration and respect. The relationships are strong and they continue to build and get stronger and stronger. And that brings favorable results: low crime rate, community prevention type programs, community policing programs, where the residents say, listen, we want to be out there supporting our police, our law enforcement, because we want safe and secure streets. And that's why many call Fort Bend County home.
Right. You know, Trever, you mentioned that Troy, your brother, your twin brother, who's Fort Bend County Sheriff right now. And for those who don't know, Sheriff Troy Nehls is running for Congressional District 22.
Yes.
He's running to be a congressman. So Trever, you're saying you would essentially continue the legacy that Troy has put in place with the work that he's done right now at the Sheriff's Department.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of great programs that Troy brought to the Sheriff's Department. And number one is he's really done a great job inside his jail. And he's brought programs such as welding type programs, HVAC type programs, where some of the prisoners, nonviolent prisoners, can actually receive some type of training. So when they're released, they can be productive members of society. And those programs that he brought to the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office, they weren't there before he became sheriff. And it allows people to leave the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office or leave the jail, start a new life, have a job where they can raise a family, or maybe they already have a family. But all these programs are being done at no cost to the taxpayer. Sharik, imagine that there's not one single penny cost to the taxpayer in order to do so. So it's programs like the ones I just described. Another program is the You Are Not Alone program. It's called the YANA program, where volunteers through the Sheriff's Office, they visit and make phone calls to the senior adults that call Fort Bend County home, just to check on them. We have a lot of senior adults that live in Fort Bend County and they're alone. They may live alone in a home or an apartment, and this allows people to reach out to them to demonstrate that love and respect and kind, tender heart to other people, to say, listen, you are not alone. We are with you. And that's another program that Troy brought to the Sheriff's Office not too long ago. So there's many programs that we will continue to build upon. But I'm thinking mental health and the fine work he's done with the crisis intervention team, because we all know that mental health is an issue, not only here in Fort Bend County, but across the state and across our nation. So the programs that he brought to Fort Bend County, we will continue to build upon them. But I want to emphasize there's always room for improvement. You're never going to have it perfect each and every day. So as long as you have a desire to excel and continue to improve and build upon the programs, I don't think you can go wrong. I think that's a winning recipe. And I think what's happening at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department is very, very good work, creative thinking, ingenuity, a lot of different things that he's doing. And And we want to continue to build upon those programs.
You mentioned all these programs, and what screams out at me here, Trevor, is that when you have programs that help them with continuing education and job placement and workforce programs, well, it reduces the recidivism rate.
That's right.
We don't want people going back to prison. It's an opportunity for rehabilitation, not for not a rotating door type situation. That's bad for them, and it's bad for our county. What role does the sheriff's office have, or what role did the sheriff's office play in reducing the recidivism rate?
Well, and if the sheriff's department was nothing more, if the Fort Bend County Jail was nothing more than a revolving door, you would think, how do you impact the recidivism rate?
Right.
Now, those that attend the programs, whether it's HVAC welding, and I think he's going to bring another program on board. If you monitor their progress once they leave jail and you track what they're doing out in society and where they're being placed, because they assist them with job placement. So they work with area businesses that have no problem hiring someone that has been in jail, sort of like giving them a second chance.
Right.
As long as they're well trained, they're respectful, and they understand they made a mistake. And there's a lot of folks out there that want to give people a second chance,
right.
Specifically your non-violent offenders. So the sheriff can play a role if he has programs aimed at reducing recidivism. And I think the programs that he does definitely does reduce the recidivism rate of those coming back into the Fort Bend County Jail. So that's a positive. But when you really think about it, how many jails across our great state or across the country conduct programs like that? I don't think there's too many. I think it's sort of a state of the art type program in a jail, not a prison, but in a jail atmosphere environment. Yet he's training these young men and women to become productive once they leave and serve their sentence. So
that's the best outcome. You leave jail, but you leave jail a better person. You leave jail a productive member of society.
Yes.
Trevor, I want to talk to you about, you and Troy are big on spirituality and faith. And you may know that we here at Minaret Foundation are also big on spirituality and faith. Tell us, what role does your faith play in the decisions you make, which measures to implement, and how has your spirituality shaped your life perspective?
It shapes each and every day of my life. And I thank God every morning he allows me to wake in the morning, because every day is a blessing in my life. My wife and I and our children attend Grand Parkway Baptist Church. It's not far down the road. And we've been members there since 2011. But I believe as a father of children, it's important that I lead by example, and I instill in them a deep-rooted faith, a love for God, and understanding that life on this earth is very, very short.
Yes.
And you never know if you're going to be given another opportunity or another day to do good in our community, to treat people with dignity and respect. And I think that's important. But I try to lead a life based upon my faith in God, knowing that I'm not really in control, but God's in control. And I'm just appreciative of all the blessings that I've received, because my wife and my children, my job, everything I have, everything that's good comes from God, Sharik, from my perspective. So I try to lead that life. I want other people to recognize it. I'm not afraid to talk about it, as you can see, Sharik, because you and I are talking about it right now. But just to let everybody know that, yes, spiritually, I believe that many things that happen or fail to happen are a result of God and his plan for each and every one of us.
Absolutely. And we have to be appreciative of the role that he allows us to play in this life, and the opportunity to serve him, and the opportunity to serve him by serving one another.
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Shriek, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. but serving one another. So no matter, from my perspective, it does not matter to me, uh, with all the different faith-based organizations that exist across Fort Bend County, our state, and our nation. You still should love one another. And for the past close to 30 years, Troy and I have developed relationships with all the different faith-based organizations that call Fort Bend County home, whether it's uh, Indo-American, Muslim American, Catholic, Sikh, all the different faith-based, because I think that you should love each and every person, no matter what they look like, what gender, what ethnic group, what they eat, what culture. It shouldn't matter, because ultimately we're all human beings, and we call the United States of America our home. And I think that there's an obligation to our state and nation to be good residents, good citizens, and kind, gentle hearted people that respect all people, no matter where they come from, what they're about, what socioeconomic status that exists in their life, or what faith they practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears here a little bit, and let's talk about law and order, and community safety.
Yes.
A pressing issue in our community, highlighted by Chief Acevedo of the Houston Police Department,
Yes.
is that they've affirmed that in the Houston area alone, that there's at least, I want to say, 20,000 documented gang members. 20,000 is a lot of people.
Yes.
20,000 documented gang members. And Fort Bend County is just, stone's throw away from Houston.
Yes.
What steps would you take to make sure gangs don't expand into our county,
Yes.
harm our communities? Where do you believe the most gang activity happens in Fort Bend?
It's a very reasonable question. Sometimes you'll see markings or taggings on a bridge or on a structure, and it's all immediately associated with a gang-related activity. Fortunately, in Fort Bend County, that we haven't seen a significant level of gang activity that's involved serious criminal activity. Not that it doesn't exist, but we have means and mechanisms in place to track documented gang members. Fortunately, we are not in the situation like the city of Houston, where they have, as you stated, over 20,000 documented gang members. We don't see that in Fort Bend County. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's being tracked and tracked very carefully, but we don't have the number of crimes associated with gang-related activity as you do in the city of Houston. And I credit that once again to something I alluded to earlier. I think the relationship that exists between the residents of Fort Bend County and the police agencies, whether it's Stafford, Missouri City, Sugar Land,
Right.
Those relationships are strong. And I think our residents are very aware. They're diligent about reporting crime. And if they see any type of markings, taggings, usually the police departments receive a call the following morning if it occurred that evening, so we can go out and tear it off the walls or scrub it off the walls. And this happened, in the last 4 to 6 weeks here in Fort Bend County. You would see spray painting on buildings or sidewalks. But what did you see the following morning? You saw the community members coming out, volunteer organizations coming out with pressure washers, with different type bleaches to remove it off of our structures. And that's what a community does. Now, I can't say they're doing that in Houston. I really don't know. But I'm telling you, out here in Fort Bend County, it's a collaborative, well-organized effort. And that relationship between law enforcement and the community is strong.
I imagine you're a proponent of relational policing.
I'm sorry?
I imagine you're a proponent of relational policing.
I believe community policing is extremely important. And it's something that I think Fort Bend County and the other law enforcement agencies do very well in Fort Bend County. I mean, you think of the different programs just being offered by the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department. But as I stated earlier, I did close to 20 years with the Sugar Land Police Department.
Right.
And I was the community relations supervisor. So I had 4 officers assigned to the different beats, and all they did was community policing, community relations. Well, that exists at the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department with just some of the programs, and I'm sure you've heard of some of these, like the Kids and Cops program, where the deputies go into the schools and they reach the children at a young age, whether it's Lamar School District or Fort Bend Independent School District, and they develop a great relationship with the police because they can be in the program for multiple years. It's called the Kids and Cops program. Something similar to, remember we used to have the old DARE program?
Yeah, I remember I used to go through.
Yeah.
I used to go through DARE, and the officer would come in, tell us about how all drugs are bad, and
Yes.
he would take us through the whole process. I think he'd come every week. It was wonderful because we'd get out of exams and pop quizzes and everything, and get.
But you know, Sharik, it was really based on drugs, right? Drug abuse, resistance education. Hey, don't do drugs, so on and so forth. Because back then in the late 80s, that's exactly what it was. So they started their program, but the Kids and Cops program offers so much more. It's really mentorship to the young kids. It develops them where they have a relationship where they can build trust with those that wear a law enforcement officer uniform. That's just one program. And then, of course, there are a lot of summer camps associated with the Kids and Cops programs. I'm thinking about the House Watch program that exists, where if you go away or you're on vacation, a deputy will check your house each and every day.
Right.
There's just a lot of them. The collaboration with the homeowners associations. As you know, Fort Bend County is a large community. It's over 800,000 people. So working with the different civic organizations and homeowners association organizations is another way to build that trust and let everybody know we're here for you. National Night Out, which you're going to see coming up next week.
Oh, we program National Night Out in Fort Bend, because I know
there will be. And here's one for you, since you're a fine Fort Bend County resident. Have you ever thought about attending the sheriff's office's Citizens Police Academy?
No, I haven't.
Well,
I've been asked to join the DEA Academy. I think that Brian Middleton's district, his academy, the FBI Academy. I just don't have time. I've got 2 kids.
I'm with you.
Right here, it's just so much time.
Well, if you had a choice of the 3, because I think Brian just started his.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had it. It's been at the Sheriff's Department for many, many years. There's 2 per year, and I think they're about 10 weeks long. So if you take a look at the 3, you'll probably find the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office one top notch, and it'll suit you well.
Yeah, and for those who are watching today, our conversation is a little unorthodox because it doesn't follow the same format as the previous candid Q&As. Trever and I had a conversation yesterday, and he's like, "Let's just throw out the questions. Let's just have a conversation, you and I." So that's a great idea. So if you're thinking, why isn't Sharik asking all these questions? Because we're supposed to be just having a conversation today.
May I ask you a question, Sharik?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this is something for you, your listeners, and your viewers. And as I told you earlier, there are 826 employees, fine men and women at the Sheriff's Office. And as your constable in Precinct 4, which encompasses most of Sugar Land, parts of Missouri City, and things of that nature, we talk about recruiting efforts to where you want your law enforcement agency to be representative of the community we serve. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's important for law enforcement at all levels. So whether it just be officers and the command staff, especially in Fort Bend County, where we're the most diverse county in the state and in the country, our command staff and the officers should reflect the community that they police.
Yeah. So when you look at it, and we've made many attempts over the last several years to try to get the different communities to assist us in that endeavor. And I'm hoping that you, your viewers, your listeners, take note of that and encourage those that are friends that have a desire to enter the law enforcement field to definitely apply to do so. But Sharik, it's very, very difficult today. Let's say you're a mother, and your 21-year-old or 22-year-old son is debating what he's going to do for the rest of his life, what type of occupation. And you throw out an engineering job, maybe something in the medical community, And then you throw a third option out there, a police officer, where you may make 44,000 a year, have Tuesday, Wednesdays off, and work night shift for 5 years. Now, mom's thinking, son, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be in the medical field, a teacher, whatever the case may be. And I can understand the mindset from a family member about, listen, there are other occupations where your life may not be in danger, but what I'm here to tell you and your listeners is the recruiting can become extremely difficult to make your departments representative
Absolutely.
of the community. So we're hoping that we can continue to build upon the trust and the relationship that we've built, and even get more different members of Fort Bend County to join various law enforcement agencies. And I know there's efforts within the city of Houston, there's efforts all across the country that live in very diverse areas to get more members to join the law enforcement field.
Trevor, speaking about recruitment,
Yep.
speaking of recruitment, and you had mentioned that the police force, law enforcement, I'm really switching. I'm trying to switch my jargon to peace officers, because that's really what law enforcement is. It's not necessarily enforcing the laws, but keeping the peace.
Yes.
And essentially that's what your license is as well. Peace officer's license.
Yeah.
In our country, after the killing of George Floyd, there was immense tension across our nation. And I bring this up when you talk about recruiting is because sometimes people don't see themselves in the police force, and they automatically jump to cops are racist, law enforcement is racist, law enforcement bad, everyone else good. Sort of this binary concept of who law enforcement is. At the end of the day, we're not going to call Ghostbusters. We're going to call the sheriff's office. We're going to call 911, or as my dad would say, 911. We'd call 911, and we'd identify. We'd wait for law enforcement to arrive and take care of the situation. Our Governor Abbott was forced to deploy the National Guard. I want to say 1,500 reservists or state troopers, 1,500 peacekeepers, we'll call them, across the state to support law enforcement departments because of riots, because of issues related to Antifa, because of issues related to looting, vandalism. I mean, we had state troopers stationed at the state capitol, sleeping in the hallways of the capitol. It was sort of and just when it seems the situation couldn't get any worse, a police officer was struck at an intersection just in Austin itself, and that was just May. Since then, we've seen countless assaults on law enforcement since May. Even to this day, we're looking at Seattle. We're looking at the havoc in Portland. Just yesterday, a police officer was struck in the back of the head with a metal bat, right? And then he sustained injuries, and he had to be carried away by his fellow officers. Could you speak a little bit more about to this racial unrest, to what's going on in our community today?
And that's a great question, and you bring up some very, very good points here. Peace officers, and I like that, Shriek, peace officers, they're mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, moms, dads. They just picked a profession to want to serve and protect,
right,
and keep peace, as you stated earlier. That's what they're trying to do. That's why they enter the field, because they want to give back to the community. And I think as long as the person's heart is more into selfless service and not selfish service, and they act and respond based upon love to other people, wanting to treat each and every person with dignity and respect. And I think we have that in Fort Bend County, which is why we have very few problems that exist in some of these large metropolitan areas. We haven't had officers hit with bats, assaulted, things of that nature in Fort Bend County. And I think we're grateful for that. Does it exist at other agencies? Well, yes, the facts are facts. But we don't have it here, and I still attribute that to the great leadership and the deep, close-knit relationship that exists between the police and those that call Fort Bend County home. Because when you imagine that about 25,000 people move to Fort Bend County each and every year, and they're not coming from Dallas, they're coming from all different states throughout our country to move into Fort Bend County. So when you think that Fort Bend County is one of the safest counties in the region, if not large counties, one of the safest in the state of Texas, if not the country, considering our size, I think people do their research and they think, look at the schools, both public and private, that exist in Fort Bend County.
That's the best place to live.
Yeah, the opportunity to start a business in Fort Bend County, with the economic growth and the potential for a business here in Fort Bend County, where you can, and I don't know where you live, and you don't have to say here, but I feel comfortable with my children playing out in the front yard.
Absolutely.
There's probably other areas where you don't. But with respect to, and I probably haven't really answered your question, but with respect to some of the civil unrest that occurs, I think it's sad for our country. I think other countries throughout the world see what's happening in our country, and they imagine, why would this happen? Why is it even allowed to happen? And why is there such a distrust or hatred for someone that wears a uniform, that all they want to do is get up in the morning, work an 8-hour shift, serve and protect the people, and go home? Now, and your listeners and viewers probably know, there is good and bad in any organization. I don't care what occupation you serve in, whether you're a teacher, a doctor, engineer, pilot, and I could go across all the different occupations that exist. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. But I think to tie in what happened in Minneapolis, which is tragic, without question, I do not know of one peace officer that I'm aware of here in Fort Bend County that feels that was justified. Not one. But I think to lump all peace officers into that same category is troubling. And it should be sad for anybody that calls America home and wants to be peaceful and loving people.
What role does law enforcement have in speaking out against? Chief Acevedo says this quite often, and so does Sheriff Gonzalez, the bad apples. What role does the executive of the agency play in asking about the bad apples?
That's a great question. And there's mechanisms in place within our organization to identify whether there's a pattern, whether a pattern exists of not necessarily abuse, but it could be verbal abuse or not treating people with dignity and respect. And when you see that pattern, when you get to a certain point, that's when the executive of the office is going to say, you're no longer going to be a police officer at this organization, and you let them go. And
it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that Chief Acevedo and many of the major chiefs around the state of Texas have railed against is that when a peace officer is terminated from an agency in the state of Texas, the peace officer can be rehired automatically, can be rehired at a different agency. So, for example, if someone is fired from Chief Acevedo's ranks, he can go to Dallas County, he can go to Matagorda County, he can go to anywhere and get rehired. And in the state of Texas, you have to be fired twice before your peace officer license is pulled. Yes. And you know this better than anyone else, Trevor, is that if you're dishonorably discharged from the military, you can't be hired anywhere.
It's going to be an awful difficult role for you under dishonorable discharge in the military. Yeah. I think maybe what happens with some of the officers that are fired at other agencies, maybe there are smaller agencies, East, West Texas. I'm not really sure, because I don't think they pay very well at some of the other places. But I think peace officers want to really work in areas where they're well respected. Right. When you think of Sugar Land or some of the suburbs in and around the Houston area, they're agencies that people want to go work. Pearland, things of that nature. But there are certain rules through TCLO, which is Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, that sort of dictate what a peace officer, because they're the governing body for that.
Absolutely. And so what would you say to, because there's going to be a push in state legislature, this, as you know, the state's meeting in January,
Right.
and our organization is going to be discussing this. It's what do you say about changing the rule to where if a peace officer is fired once, their license is pulled after, of course, due course process, they have interaction with their union, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. But after that, their license is pulled and they can't be rehired again.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
after misconduct, I mean, that should
yeah.
just be it.
And Chief Acevedo, he's he- being the chief of a large agency, and it's a union-based organization. So he's up against the union, the Houston Police Officers Union, probably on disciplinary actions, and that relationship it must be strong between the head of the agency and the union with Houston Police Department. But with respect to the question of an officer that's fired from an agency, I would encourage those that are going to write the rule, or if they offered me an opportunity to provide my phone ringing, my apologies.
No worries.
We would have to look at I sort of look at the totality of the circumstances surrounding it, where you make sure they're given their due process, whatever the case may be. But if the state or the governing body decides based upon overwhelming evidence, it should be one way, well, then that's what they need to do and just put it in the law.
Earlier you were speaking to there's this large, and you really you underplayed it, Trevor. You said officers go out on an 8-hour shift, and we know that's often not the case. Sometimes they'll pull double shifts.
Yes.
And so they're in incredibly stressful situations throughout the day.
Yes.
They leave home, their spouse doesn't know if they're coming back.
Yes.
So there's always this stress and anxiety around law enforcement. There are people out there who just absolutely hate law enforcement officers for whatever reasons, because of their experiences in their life. And would you say that we have that case here in Fort Bend County?
No,
No.
I do not believe we do. And this would be something for your viewers that live in Fort Bend County. And I think if you ask them, do you feel safe and secure in your home? Do you feel that law enforcement is here to protect you, no matter who you are, where you come from, what your socioeconomic status is? No. Are we going to get it perfect? Absolutely not. I don't think it's perfect nowhere, but there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely.
But I think in Fort Bend County, we don't have officers or deputies pulling motorists from their vehicles on the side of the road, beating them with a stick. You don't see it here in Fort Bend County. Very seldom, if at all. And I've been a peace officer for 28 years in Fort Bend County. So I understand and I know Fort Bend County. I think the interactions that we have are very, very positive in Fort Bend County.
Yeah. There's groups in Fort Bend County that sometimes are a little outspoken. In the time I've lived in Fort Bend County all my life, with the mistake that I lived in Dallas County for about a year and a half. I regret it and I won't do it again. But would you say racism is not an issue here in Fort Bend? That overall we're pretty good?
I wouldn't say that racism is not an issue, but what I will tell you as your sheriff, I will not tolerate any forms of discrimination or racism against anyone in Fort Bend County.
Okay, so when we talk about racism, especially as it relates to Fort Bend County, you already touched really well that the sheriff's department isn't having any issues.
I didn't just say the sheriff's department. I said Fort Bend County. I am unaware of any agencies, because word would trickle throughout Fort Bend County law enforcement if there are issues with abuse, any types of injustice. It would, first of all, it would make the news, considering the social media platforms and the 24/7 instant media. If it exists, well, Sharik, would you live here if you knew that existed?
No, absolutely not. I don't.
I think that pretty much answers the question, that if it does exist, those that feel it does exist with police community relations, it would be an interesting discussion. But I would like their opinion, because I think it's important to be open-minded. Now, we all know police reform is coming in some form, whether it's through state mandates, federal mandates, whatever the case may be. And I think that any law enforcement administrator is receptive and open minded to whatever mandates that may come down as a result of some of the actions by police officers in the last 6, 9 months, whatever the case may be. So I believe it's coming, but I know that some of the reform measures being taken in Fort Bend County, for example, on the use of force policy, there's already been some changes to the use of force policy and it's called duty to intervene. So if a peace officer sees another peace officer using some type of force unnecessary, or even if a supervisor is doing the act, that they have a duty to intervene. But as I stated earlier, in Fort Bend County, very seldom will you see that type of activity because of the positive relationship that exists. So for the organizations that are out there, and I don't know if they're specifically mentioning Fort Bend County or they're referencing maybe the greater Houston area, but if they're saying it exists in Fort Bend County, number one, I haven't had a chance to talk with them, but being in here for 28 years, 20 with Sugarland, and now as the constable, I'd be interested in having a conversation with them.
That's interesting. That approach is interesting because, playing devil's advocate for a moment is let's imagine for a second there is some unrest in our county. I believe there's a statue in front of the city of Richmond, or Richmond City Hall, that Jaybirds. I believe it's the Jaybirds. It's a Jaybird statue. Let's say there's some unrest or racial unrest around that issue, and folks come out and they're protesting, they're upset, and they're hollering about that statue itself. What would be your approach to handle that situation?
Well, I can't speak of that specific issue that you bring up, but I know it's in the city of Richmond, and I'm sure the city of Richmond Police Department and their police chief have ways to handle any form of a crowd control or whatever you may consider a protest or gatherings. So I would think that the city of Richmond be very well equipped to solve whatever issues happen in their community, much like Missouri City, Stafford, and these municipalities that have their own police agencies.
Right. So what would be your approach? Would it be through conversation, through dialogue? How would you handle the situation if there is unrest in our county?
Well, obviously, dialogue is the way to go. There has to be. Now, I don't know if de-escalation techniques need to take place, because hopefully there's no threats of violence to begin with. Right. But I've always been a believer of you can do more by talking than anything else. In fact, I think of my father when he was the sheriff of Dodge County. He was handling motorcycle gangs back in the day. Wow. And he would do it through dialogue. Wow. And I think that's important because everyone has interests. You have interests. I have interests. All people have interests. Some may be self-interests, but I think it's important to be open-minded on other people's interests. Things go south when it's a win-at-all-cost mentality versus a win-win for everyone.
Right.
The scenario you described, dialogue, would hopefully bring a win-win to all parties involved based upon their interests.
Recently, there was an article in the Houston Chronicle, which I'm sure you saw. It had to do with unequal policing of Latinos in Fort Bend County. Yeah. Do you believe that? Did you have a chance to read the article? And do you believe that Latinos are disproportionately stopped by the Fort Bend County's narcotic division? And if so, how would you solve the issue in the future?
If I'm elected sheriff, number one, I am familiar with that specific article. And the Fort Bend County, there's a task force, and it's got 6 agencies: Rosenberg, Missouri City, Sugar Land, Richmond, the sheriff's office, and the district attorney's office. But if I am elected sheriff and take office January 1, I will not put up with any racial profiling as the sheriff. It will not happen. I will not tolerate it. The residents of Fort Bend County will not tolerate it. And that's my position on it.
Right. But what would you do to solve this issue in the future?
Well, first of all, I would have to look at the data that exists. I mean, I'm not the sheriff, so I would have to become more familiar with the data that exists with specifically that issue, and leave it at that. But I assure you this: I won't tolerate racial profiling in Fort Bend County.
That's good. So tell me about, speaking of racial profiling, let's switch gears a little bit to discrimination and hate, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia. What role does the sheriff's office have? What role does law enforcement have in minimizing or ensuring this doesn't happen in our county?
I think if the leader of the organization has a mission statement and goals and objectives to where their employees, whether they're peace officers with a municipality or deputies, if they're a constable's office or a sheriff's office, they should treat everyone with dignity and respect. So if they don't target specific groups, if they treat everybody with dignity and respect, and let them know they are there to serve and protect all people, to make them feel comfortable if they're a victim of a crime, even if they're a suspect of a crime, to treat them with dignity and respect, I don't think you'll have problems. And I think some of and I think that Fort Bend County does very well in that regard. Now, if there are organizations or others that have information that is contrary to what I just stated, I'm receptive to listening. I'm all ears. I would be interested in what some of our because you were mentioning Islamophobia in some of the like minority type communities with respect to maybe profiling. So I'd be interested in Chief Eric Robbins. He's a minority candidate. He's the chief of Sugar Land. Richard Ramirez, the chief of Stafford. Michael Ellison, the chief of Arcola. I would be interested in seeing, if you had them on this program, if they would feel there's some type of profiling or racial injustice that exists within their police or peace agencies. I'd be curious to know what their take is. That would probably be a good follow-up with you to ask them, how do they feel as administrators of a police agency? And then I'd be interested in what you have to say on that.
But specifically, I'm sorry, I should have clarified this. I didn't mean within your agency. I meant within the county itself, right? We've seen since 2016, for whatever reason, there has been a strong uptick. The Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Law Poverty Center, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and a host of other organizations have indicated anywhere between a 28% to 42% increase in hate crimes throughout the country. Because just the way we talk to one another, the way we deal with one another, people who had been in the recesses of the room, who had been hiding in the corners of a room, now have a seat at the dining table. And it's scary. It's very scary. It's scary for minority communities. It's scary for all people who love one another and believe that we should live in harmony together. What role does the sheriff's office play in ensuring that we maintain plurality?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's unfortunate that even exists in our country. I think it's sad that there's hate based upon what a person looks like, what they eat, or what part of the region of the country they live in. That should be a shock to the conscience of anybody listening to you and I right now, that even exists. You have peace officers in LA sitting in their car, 2 young peace officers, and bullets riddle the windows of their police car. And to shoot those 2 police officers for what? There's no justification at all. I can't imagine the level of hate that must exist in a person's heart to want to do that. Just walk up to a police car and riddle the windows with bullets. It, if that is not troublesome for every person that walks this earth, I would be utterly amazed if it's not troublesome to them. Now, what can the sheriff do? Any law enforcement agency, whether it's the sheriff or a police chief anywhere across our great country, as long as they have officers, employees that show dignity and respect for all people, I think that the law enforcement agency is doing their part. Are they going to get it right 100% of the time? No. As I stated earlier, nobody is perfect. No organization is perfect.
Mm.
Whether it's a football organization, police agency, hospital, school, and I could go on, engineering firm, I could go on and on and on.
Right.
But in Fort Bend County, we've done very, very well in developing and forging the relationship.
So there's the Black residents of Fort Bend County have been particularly affected by issues that have revolved around, just the past months with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, and these are just the two recent incidents. And so I wouldn't say there's just a massive distrust. I think there's always caution, and there's always this fear that they're next.
Yep.
That officers will target them despite the diversity, right? How would you alleviate that concern?
Well, number one, I would think
tell them
that's a reasonable question.
doesn't exist in our agency. Racism isn't a part and parcel of Fort Bend County. That you're all good.
Well, I would think it would be open the line of communication with those groups or that part of the community that feels they're being targeted or whatever the case as you described. I think it'd be important to reach out to Brian. You mentioned Brian earlier, Brian Middleton, and ascertain what he sees as far as prosecution with respect to police officers, if there's cases being filed against police officers for certain acts that may be racially motivated. But I think it's being open-minded and at least giving everybody an opportunity to sit at the table and define ways and strategies and measures to eliminate whatever problems exist.
Would you make this top of your priority slate if elected as Fort Bend County Sheriff?
It's been my top of my priorities as the elected council for 8 years, and ever since I was a police officer, because I'm of the belief, and it's been in my DNA, service to the community, show dignity and respect and love for all people. And what I've done for the last 30 years in Fort Bend County with the different groups and cultures that call Fort Bend County home, I'm proud of the relationship that I've built with the different members of the community. In fact, I think what Troy and I have done for the last 30 years with respect to forging those relationships, making ourselves available, always on the phone, having good communication. We don't always agree.
Right.
Having good communication, that's how you solve problems. And we've been doing it for 30 years.
Right. One of the questions that's on Facebook is something related to one of the enforcement actions that your brother took as Fort Bend County Sheriff, where he cited someone who had a derogatory word on the back of their vehicle with President Trump's name on it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you feel that's restrictive of the First Amendment? What's your take on it?
I'm not going to speak about the actions that were taken in regard to that. I wasn't the sheriff of Fort Bend County
Right.
at that time. There's been a lot of discussion.
No, so earlier on, we had talked about continuing your brother's legacy, and part of that legacy was ensuring the recidivism rate in our county is hopefully, and I'm putting these words in your mouth, hopefully we can get to a 0% recidivism rate,
Yeah.
where we don't have this revolving door.
Yes.
But part of that legacy is also just the First Amendment. How do you feel about that?
I agree with the First Amendment. People should have the right to freedom of speech. I think we would all agree to that.
Freedom of speech. So you would be okay with bumper stickers and you'd be okay with this form of protest?
Well, you have to look at what the law states, what laws exist, what case law exists that define the specific circumstance, whether freedom of speech or that specific issue becomes controversial. I would think you would look at the information, the totality of the circumstances, and then that would really define what you have with the respected incident or circumstance.
And the reason I bring that up is because, forms of protest, especially peaceful forms of protest, seem to be under attack. When I say under attack, that might be a little hyperbolic, but it seems that all over the media, all over Facebook and Twitter, it's even just kneeling as a form of protest becomes a massive insult to the point where it's injurious, to the point where people are just up in arms about it. And there's also call on law enforcement to prevent people from kneeling during the national anthem. There was something that was going around social media and the news the other day. Does law enforcement play a role?
Sharik, my friend, I had no idea. We've been on here for 1 hour, 2 minutes, and I must go. I know we planned for 45 minutes, and I've truly enjoyed this conversation.
Would you like to end it with that question?
Time has gotten away from me, so I got to go because I'm already late for my 2 o'clock. But I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Trever. Thanks again for joining us today and being so generous with your time. And have a blessed day.
I would love to come back. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Take care. My name is Sharik Abdulghani. I'm the director of Minaret Foundation, where our focus is to lift American Muslim voices for sustainable change through multi-faith and civic engagement. We were just joined by Constable Trever Nehls. You can learn more about Trever at trevernehls.com. It's at the bottom of the screen. He is running for Fort Bend County Sheriff against Eric Fagan, who will be joining us on a program shortly as well in the next couple of days. Thanks again, Trever, for spending so much time with us. And we're going to continue our candidate Q&A sessions in the weeks ahead up to the path of November. Thank you all for joining us, and God bless.